As I said, there's lots going on this Thanksgiving Monday, so let's get to it. First, Grapes is here to wish you a happy Thanksgiving. He's here. He's got his turkey, and the top there is nicely golden brown. It's just a little bit more than golden brown, and he's saying happy Thanksgiving from Don Cherry. There you go. I thought that's a nice way to start things off. Here is what's going on in Israel, and Anthony says, "Are you a Canadian trapped in Israel right now?" Quote, "Sorry, we're off for Thanksgiving weekend," is the only response you'll get from the government. What a joke. Please share far and wide. This is Robbie Singal. This is, I guess, a Facebook post. And he says, and this is how much people use Facebook. They don't. I did not want this to be my first long post on Facebook in a while, but here we go. I'm currently in Israel, and I'm very fortunate to be safe as of now, he says. I have contacted the emergency lines for the Canadian citizens abroad and was able to speak to someone who told me to email the emergency address, where I was met with automated responses, until I was told to call the number for Embassy Canada to Israel, which then redirected me back to the emergency phone number I spoke to earlier. Luckily, the same person I spoke to before answered and remembered my case. He spoke to his supervisor and subsequently told me that because the embassy, which deals with all emergency travel requests, is closed on weekends and then closed on Monday for Canadian Thanksgiving, any inquiries will only be replied to on Tuesday. This means that I have no way of contacting anyone to help me leave the country for at least 48 hours. It's truly baffling to see how this government and its Foreign Affairs Department treat its citizens abroad who are in a war zone. So that's interesting. Aaron again says, so Sierra says, the American embassy has already sent repatriation flights and Canada can't even open the embassy. My dad has been on the phone for hours, and she's tweeting at people who might be able to help. And Aaron says, isn't the single most important job of a Canadian embassy to assist Canadians during a crisis? What a disgrace. No, enjoy your turkey, right? Enjoy your turkey. It's cool. This is Vicegrad. I guess this is a foreign news article. And it says, breaking, Poland announces that it's starting to evacuate its citizens from Israel. The Polish Air Force will send three C-130H Hercules transport planes for the operation. Poland will also help evacuate other EU cities and foreigners who want to leave the country. So, I mean, that's interesting. They're able to wield their Air Force and move people and planes and all of that logistics very, very efficiently. Remember when the Canadian Prime Minister had a plane malfunction that definitely wasn't drugs in India, and then it took 2 full days to get a replacement situation sorted out because nobody seemed to want to help him? Weird, right? Super weird. Definitely not drugs. But if Canada opened the embassy, do you think that we'd be able to get a plane there before Tuesday? Not now. It's Monday. Too late. Too late. It's almost Tuesday already there. Ryan O'Connor's highlighting another story. Sierra says, hey, Government of Canada and all of these other people, are you going to help Canadians stuck in Israel? My parents and grandfather are stranded in Tel Aviv, and the hotline provides zero help. They're told the embassy won't open until Tuesday because of Thanksgiving. They have no flight home. So there you go. That's a bad situation when war breaks out. Corey Morgan says, Canadians are stranded in Israel. As a war breaks out, the Canadian embassy is closed for Thanksgiving, so they tell people to contact Ottawa. You can't make this up. It's really impossible to bring staff in during an emergency. What does it take? Yep. Lisa says, embassy staff are hard at work to provide support and services to Canadians in need. If you need support, please contact our headquarters in Ottawa. This is the best way to quickly put you in touch with the people who can serve you best. So all of the stories I've told you up until now have been people calling this line being sent back to, well, it doesn't open until Tuesday. Sorry, we can't do anything because they handle flights. And no, they're not there. Sorry, they're celebrating Thanksgiving. This is the emergency hotline, and we're not aware of an emergency. So Thanksgiving it is. Rex Glacier is responding to this City News tweet. City News says, some Canadians say they're stuck in Israel in the midst of deadly fighting as airlines cancel their flights out and embassies in Tel Aviv closed for the Thanksgiving weekend. And Rex says the Trudeau regime is on vacation. Please check back on Tuesday. Sure is. Absolutely is. Michael Chong says Conservatives are calling on the Government of Canada to immediately open our embassy in Israel to provide emergency assistance and consular services to Canadian citizens in the country. It's pretty incredible that request needs to be made at all. It's pretty wild. I think that it's outside of the norm that most Canadians would expect. You would expect that in the war zone, if war breaks out, if the Saigon, right? If Canada was a major player in Saigon and war broke out in Saigon, the whole thing would be done, and Canadians at home would be like halfway through their dinner, right? Like rather than being airlifted out. It's a very bad situation because they're not being discerning about who they're targeting and attacking. Tourists are just as acceptable a target as Israelis are, et cetera, et cetera. And these people are terrorists, right? Qum says Palestinians expelled. And in 1917, this is the map of Palestine, pre-British mandate Palestine. 1948, the green area is Palestine. 1967, the green area is Palestine. 1995, the green area has been reduced. And in 2020, I guess there's Trump's conceptual map. Oh, okay, that was Trump's attempt at a two-state solution. Fundamentally, there's a reason for this, and the reason for this is the West allowed this to happen legally, above board legally. Nobody said boo. Everybody said, yep, that's a good idea. Let's do that. The United Kingdom says so. The US says so. They're all on the same side, by the way. They knew they were on the same side. They knew they were going to do this. And there was never a chance for the Palestinians to say no, even though they did say no. And the UN doesn't have binding powers. They can't say this ethnic group, Khalistani, for example, should have this landmass. They don't get to say that. They don't have that power, but that's what happened then. And people are saying there's more to this. Sure, of course there's more to this, definitely. But I'm just saying the powers that be, the current powers that be, if you just look at the actions from that date forward, the UK removing themselves, handing control to the United Nations and not the Palestinians, and the United Nations putting another group of people there, that's going to create conflict. And then funding both the Israelis who are there and the Palestinians who are in the West Bank further exacerbates that conflict, right? And I think that we need to stop it. We, the West, are responsible for a lot of the circumstances surrounding this conflict, period. And I'm on the side of the innocent people who are victims in all of this. I don't want, and including Israelis who are victims in this, I don't want a situation where terrorists and their actions are used to, destroy an entire country. Isn't that genocidal? All of that seems like a bad response to what's going on. But it's very difficult, very, very difficult to go in and take the people out who caused this and be sure that you got all the terrorists out and so on and so forth. And so maybe you should stop being aggressive yourselves, Israel, and then maybe the aggression will stop. You know what I mean? Tit for tat and people having peace treaties and all the rest of it. I know it's difficult, but again, and solving Israel-Palestine is not necessarily the goal of today's show, but it's one of those things where what we've done has created this situation. So we need to do something different. And so I feel a need to explain what else we should do. But I think that it's too big a problem to just throw out a solution and say, that's it. Because there's going to be flaws with all of my thinking because I'm just one guy throwing out ideas, right? But fundamentally, the goal should not be, let's fund these people and look the other way when they use that money to buy rockets, and fund these people and look the other way when they use that money to use lawcraft and bulldozers to do the same thing during this war that we're fighting both sides of. We should stop all of that, and we should start trying to find a real solution that I think fundamentally, when it comes down to it, people want a life where they can predictably have their family be prosperous. And that's it. And if you can set the circumstances for that, where the family can be prosperous and you can self-govern, you can be autonomous and say, I don't want to have that injection, and I don't want to be cut out of society for not having that injection. All of that, right? And that's in line with being prosperous, right? Like if somebody can come in and say, your ears stick out too much, you can't come to the grocery store. My family can't be prosperous because maybe their ears are going to stick out too much. My ears stick out for those listening. But it's one of those things that if you set the right circumstances, then these very deep old wounds could start to potentially be healed. But if you keep showing up with bulldozers, or if you keep sending rockets, that's not going to happen. And we're setting the circumstances for that not to happen at all. And we set the circumstances for these things to be created. I'll prove it right now. Ariel says, terrorist groups, Hamas, Antifa, BLM, KKK, ISIS, Daesh. Guess what they all have in common? The CIA. Hamas is being used to give justification to eliminate innocent civilians. Israelis are being targeted to create a scenario of retaliation on Palestinians. Why? Because these Hamas Palestinian terrorists are not actually from that region, no different than the Antifa terrorists who were destroying cities they didn't even live in for racial justice when they were not even African Americans. Same thing happening to Palestinians. Do you see the games they're playing with people's lives? These conservative influencers are trying to use the CIA terrorist group named Hamas as a conduit to eliminate people they always had plans to remove from that area, so Kazakhstanis can have a new territory. Get it now? I don't know about Kazakhstanis, but I think fundamentally there's something accurate about the CIA, the United States, the West having an influence in creating a lot of these things to destabilize the region. And I think that there's something in the idea that these are potentially just regional fighters who are willing to go wherever they're needed to go to make the money that they need to make and then disappear. And then the West Bank's holding the bag in this case. But there have been other people left holding the bag through history. Here is Ron Paul making the case that these terrorist organizations, Hamas themselves, were created by the West very directly by George W. Bush, which is the story that I've been telling for the last little while. It's worth it. I think we're probably going to listen to the full 2 minutes. Here we go.
What's happening in the Middle East, and in particular with Gaza right now, we have some moral responsibility for both sides in a way, because we provide help and funding for both Arab nations and Israel. And so we definitely have a moral responsibility, and especially now today, the weapons being used to kill so many Palestinians are American weapons, and American funds essentially are being used for this. But there's a political liability which I think is something that we fail to look at, because too often there's so much blowback from our intervention in areas that we shouldn't be involved in. Hamas, if you look at the history, you'll find out that Hamas was encouraged and really started by Israel, because they wanted Hamas to counteract Yasser Arafat. And you said, well, yeah, that was better then and served its purpose, but we didn't want Hamas to do this. So then we as Americans say, well, we have such a good system, we're going to impose this on the world. We're going to invade Iraq and teach people how to be Democrats. We want free elections. So we encourage the Palestinians to have a free election. They do, and they elect Hamas. So we first, indirectly and directly through Israel, help establish Hamas. Then we have election. Then Hamas becomes dominant, so we have to kill them. It just doesn't make sense. During the 80s, we were allied with Osama bin Laden. And we were contending with the Soviets. It was at that time our CIA thought it was good if we radicalized the Muslim world. So we financed the madrasa schools to radicalize the Muslims in order to compete with the Soviets. There's too much blowback. There's a lot of reasons why we should oppose this resolution. It is not in the interest of the United States. It's not in the interest of Israel either.
So, yeah, right? History is something that has happened, and we should talk about it. Here's Ariel again. Barack Obama supports Israel. Hillary Clinton supports Israel. Laura Loomer supports Israel. Nikki Haley supports Israel. Joe Biden supports Israel. Liberal media supports Israel. CIA supports Israel. NATO supports Israel. The EU supports Israel. Think about it, right? It's very, very interesting what's going on today. Justin Trudeau calls this guy, who is this guy? The president of the UAE. So the United Arab Emirates. He calls the president of the UAE and he says, on the phone today, His Highness and I spoke about the current situation in Israel. We expressed our deep concern and discussed the need to protect civilian life. We also spoke about India and the importance of upholding and respecting the rule of law. I mean, how did that conversation go, eh? Talking about it in Israel, et cetera. And then he said, what's up with India, man? What happened there? Right? The drugs? Yeah, the rule of law, eh? Why the king of the UAE? Why does this phone call matter? And why? What does this matter at all? Melanie Joly is making phone calls as well, but to different people. This is the foreign affairs minister for the Kingdom of Jordan. And she says, I've spoken with my Jordanian counterpart regarding the Hamas terror attacks against Israel and the situation in Gaza. We reiterated the importance of ensuring that violence does not escalate further. We will remain in close contact and coordinate our efforts. I say again, we are the rat in the maze going for the cheese. They want us to enthusiastically embrace this war. They want us to not question sending funding to this war. We have to support Israel, they'll say. Then we'll create a humanitarian disaster in the Gaza Strip, and somebody will say, what about these poor innocent people? And then they'll say, we've got to fund these poor innocent people. And then we'll fund a bunch of money into the Gaza Strip for these poor innocent people who were bombed and blah, 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 all this stuff. And then all of a sudden we're just, again, funding both sides of this ridiculous situation. And then when it all blows up, like it's predictably going to, like it just did, Biden just sent $6 billion to Iran, who funded that into a Hamas attack. Right? $6 billion. That's a lot of money. I don't know what I'd do with $6 billion. I was joking about $24 million a year as like a continual operating salary. And what I would do with that, I'd have a Christmas party. I'd have one heck of a Christmas party. But I don't know what I'd do with $6 billion. Like, what kind of terrorist attack do you think you could wage with $6 billion? Do you think you could get into a rave? Right? Like, there's all sorts. Do you think you could get the Israeli military to stop monitoring their fencing? Interesting stuff. Anyway, I don't understand the point of calling regional leaders. Canada's not able, we're not important enough to call anybody in Israel, so we'll call people who are nearby and just have conversations about what happened in India, I guess. We called them to tell them that we support Israel. Cool. Like what? Very strange. Cat Canada says, 6 years ago, Justin Trudeau flung our gates of Canada, our immigration gates, wide open to unchecked immigration. Today, terrorist sympathizers celebrate terror on Canadian soil. We'll look at that just in a minute. Justin Trudeau says, to those fleeing persecution, terror, and war, Canadians will welcome you regardless of your faith. Diversity is our strength. What an idiot. And Maxime Bernier counters this by saying, when you support mass immigration and the cult of diversity, you also support importing fanatics who will want to resume their tribal conflicts and religious wars of their home countries here in Canada. Do you remember the Eritreans? Back to this. You support undermining our social cohesion, our tradition of peaceful coexistence, and our widely shared values of politeness, tolerance, and openness. You support dividing our country into a collection of tribes with no national identity or purpose and turning our democracy into a pandering contest for ethnic votes. You support increasing strife and violence in the streets of Canadian cities. In short, you support destroying Canada. And I would agree with all of that. Here is Rex, and he's pointing out what happened to all the Liberal MPs and ministers. Why are you hiding now? This is Anthony Koch. He says, downtown Montreal right now, what has become of us? There's a whole bunch of Palestinian flags. And I said at the beginning of the show, there's three segments. There's Hamas and they're terrorists. There's Israel, and it seems like they're the victims in this. And there are innocent people who are caught in the middle who just happen to live in the West Bank. Although, I say again, how good are the hospitals? How good are the schools? Like, you're not going to live in the West Bank lightly. Is there a group of people who are like enthusiastic about living there, or is everyone there supportive of Hamas? If everyone there is supportive of Hamas, how did they plan this attack and all of it go off without any kind of notice? I have questions. I have a whole bunch of questions about how they facilitated this, how they paid for this, what kind of living situations there. Apparently Tommy Robinson, the guy who was going against the UK for the rape gangs and all of the rest of it, he lives in some beach area now, and he was doing a rant on it, and he said he's been to the West Bank, he's been to Palestine, he's seen who they are, and he says they live like animals, they're terrorists, they're terrible people. He says he stands with Israel, and fundamentally, like I was saying earlier, the conditions for life need to be such that you can prosper, that you can have a family that's prosperous, that you can know that if your children work hard, that they can succeed in that country, right? And not they don't have to be the right height, they don't have to have ears that don't stick out, they don't have to be bald. You know what I mean? Like, they can just succeed. They don't have to have the right skin color. They can just succeed. That's the preconditions for having a viable country. So are you moving into the West Bank to be persecuted? Is that the thing? Are you moving there to join a war with your family? Like, I can't understand the mentality, and maybe I've just not grown up in that part of the world, so the culture is that foreign to me that I just can't articulate what they could be thinking. But for me, as a person who prioritizes survival, right? Like there are psychological things that are true about human people, and you don't want to die, I think, most of the time. You don't put yourself in a situation where you're going to be questioning your ability to get food. So like, you have to view that as a better situation than the one you're in. So it seems strange to do that. Now, people are going to meet there and they're going to fall in love maybe, and they're going to have babies there maybe. But then at that point in time, usually somebody says, we should probably like get out of here. And then somebody says, let's establish a school. But I'd still wonder, like, how good's that school, right? So there's lots of questions. I have lots of questions. Does that make everybody terrorists, right? It's muddy. It's muddy. Somebody said there's a lot of ways to repatriate these people and get them out of harm's way, and put them back into countries that are very culturally similar to theirs, geographically nearby. And then somebody responded, this was all on Twitter yesterday, somebody responded, yeah, but the US and Canada are going to take them all. And I think there's 12 or 15 million or something like that. But I think that might be high. 15 might be high, but I think 12 million, which again is high. How are you coming to the conclusion, let's go to the West Bank? That's, what we should do? Move to the West Bank. Great idea, honey. Great, awesome. Yes, let's do that. What is happening? Anyway, when you import people who are supportive of Palestine and they don't understand the conflict that they're supporting, it's very interesting. Brittany says, let me get this straight. Actual hateful protests are fine. Just don't ask for freedom or the ability to keep your kids safe. These protests seem like they're standing on the side of the terrorists, not on the innocent civilians. You've been persecuted, et cetera, et cetera. And people are, well, I'll show you this in a minute, but here's the Mississauga situation. Mississauga, Ontario, after dark, a truck of young men cheering in support of the Hamas terror attacks in Israel, waving Palestinian flags. If they had Canadian flags and it said Free Canada, they'd be arrested. RCMP would already be on scene. They'd have dogs and maybe horses. Ezra Levent says lots of horn honking and other traffic violations. When people Trudeau hates do this, they're arrested and fined and eventually subjected to the Emergencies Act. When people Trudeau likes do this, police act as the protesters' escorts. Yep, that's true in Canada, right? Very scary stuff. Son of a Bench says the war in Israel is bringing to light what the world is saying about Canada. Canada is a country that harbors terrorists. India continues to accuse Canada of having Khalistani terrorists here. Jagmeet Singh is known to have had ties with them also. We now have young men driving around Mississauga, Ontario, cheering and celebrating the Palestinian terrorist group Hamas attacking Israel. Not good. And also CUPE, one of the CUPE leaders, is on Palestinian side. Here's more examples. Jonathan Kay says, astounding. Laurier social work professor Jessica Hutchinson responds to Hamas mass murder of hundreds of Jews by urging Laurier colleagues to include support for Palestinians who are taking their land back in daily land acknowledgement recitations. Crazy town. I don't stand on the side of terrorists. I don't think there's any situation in history where killing innocent women and children is the way to win. Although history is littered with examples of people doing that. It happens a lot. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm just saying it's generally not seen as a good thing, right? That's not seen as, those good guys back then killed all those women and children. Nobody's saying that. What? Wid says, settler, you will learn. By the millions will return. Chant breaks out as pro-Palestine rally marches in Washington, D.C. This settler mentality is very interesting with regards to being expanded out to everywhere. Whereas Canada, so I saw Owen Benjamin yesterday talking about how he supports Israel's right to defend itself because fundamentally there's a lot of similarities between the creation of Israel and the creation of the United States. The United States showed up and there were Indians here, and the people decided they were going to make their civilization anyway. And I always viewed, so Canada anyway, I don't know about the United States, but in Canada, there, the way I've heard it anyway, there was not a cohesive country from sea to sea. There wasn't something that, there wasn't even an entity that was, you know, all of this land is our land, right? And Canada grew different, like Canada wasn't created by the settlers who arrived, etc. But the creation of Canada was very different than the creation of the United States. But it took a long period of time, and I mean, like it moved through a political machine almost, right? Like the creation of Canada went through a period of time where Canada was Upper Canada and Lower Canada, and provinces joined confederation at their will, and like there was a lot of time between the times of the Pilgrims and the times of original Europeans meeting the First Nations people and the time of the establishment of Canada as a country. And there was a lot of history between then and now. And we all grew up together. And that's just kind of how things work, right? And I think that reimagining history is being purposely weaponized against the kids in order to facilitate, well, what's happening with the terrorists in Israel, right? So I think that it's wild to watch people just mouth these words about settlers and all the rest and really have no understanding of history whatsoever. It's quite something to me, period. In addition to calling leaders who are geographically close to Israel, Melanie Joly says she spoke to one of the Palestinian Authority leaders, Dr. Raid Malki. Sorry, I've probably got it wrong. I expressed condolences for the death of Palestinian civilians and reiterated our condemnation of Hamas's terror attack on Israel. The violence must stop, and the protection of civilians is paramount. Again, I think that it's really, really interesting with regards to Canadian funding the Palestinian Authority and finding out how, like, what kind of role the Palestinian Authority played. Was money funneled in? Was it all Iran? Was it foreign fighters? Was it people from Palestine actual? There's so many questions I have. And the fact that our government is acting as if they have answers and they're like on the way to fixing the problem, it seems crazy. It seems absolutely bonkers to me because I have nothing but questions. CTV News says it's very clear, according to Bob Ray, that Iran is involved in attacks on Israel. Canada's ambassador to the United Nations, Bob Ray says. And here's a reminder, never forget, Trudeau was in favor of appeasing the Iranian dictatorship that backed the Hamas attacks on Israel. Here's when he bowed to Iran's foreign minister. So there you go. I remember covering that and thinking, this probably is going to be bad. Yeah. Hilly, this person, sorry, I'm getting it wrong, says, in case you didn't hear the IDF spokesperson, it begins. Gaza is under complete lockdown. No one comes in, no one leaves. The border is locked down. All passages are closed. We have shut down their electricity. We've cleaned our towns and cities of any terrorists. 300,000 reserve soldiers have been drafted, the most ever. And now we go on the offensive. The prayer for our soldiers is blah, and they've got the prayer there. Here we go. The blood of our brothers and sisters will be avenged, and that starts now. So they've got 3 female Israeli soldiers holding hands and, sadly marching into some kind of battle, I guess. Yeah, it's propaganda, but it seems like this terrible thing happened, and now we have the moral authority and the moral high ground to do this terrible action, right? And I don't agree with that. I think that there's probably a lot more to this. Mario says the strike group, like a lot more to this. Like you go in surgically, you rescue whoever was kidnapped and who is alive. You arrest those people and bring them back to Israel and put them in prison. You use the court system to prosecute them. Like you don't glass the West Bank. That's not what you're supposed to do in a civilized society, right? Yes, terrorism is terrible, but if you take it up a notch, what's to stop them from taking it up a notch? Right? Like that's how you're supposed to do it, I think. Here's Mario, and he says the strike group led by the American aircraft carrier USS Gerald Ford is on the way to Israel. This is the largest aircraft issue in the world. The American reinforcements will also include additional warships and fighter jets. Will this war last long? The war against the West Bank that is funded by the Americans? No, I don't think so. iSource News says, shock report, Israel tells the White House to stand down. According to defense sources, Netanyahu doesn't trust Biden and wants the U.S. carrier group away from Israel. Well, that's good news, right? Here is Netanyahu, and I'll say what he's saying. This is how to get what you want when you want it. And one says, Netanyahu's real plan, make Palestine the aggressor, and then completely obliterate Palestine in retaliation. This was a secret recording from 20 years ago, and earlier today, Netanyahu said something similar. We will turn everything to ruins. Here we go. He says the main thing is, first of all, to strike them, not once but several times, so painfully that the price they pay is unbearable. So far, the price tag is not unbearable. I mean, a large-scale attack on the Palestinian Authority, causing them to fear that everything is about to collapse. Fear is what brings them to... Hold on, and somebody breaks in. Hold on, but then again, the world will say we're the aggressors. And he says, they can say whatever they want. Aren't you afraid of what they'll say, Bibi? And he says, especially today with the U.S., I know how they are, he says. America is something that you can easily maneuver and move in the right direction. And even if they say something. So then they say something. So what? 80% of Americans support us. It's absurd. Now, I wish I had a longer clip, but just going from that, it seems like he knows exactly what he's doing to manipulate the wider masses. Here's Joe Biden creepily... He creepily bends over and talks to this woman, like in her face. But he's making the case here that if you leave weapons, if you are trying to get out of Afghanistan, for example, it's going to take a year. And if you leave all your weapons behind, maybe 7 months. Well, it took him a weekend, didn't it? It was a weekend and a half. Get everybody out-ish, if you can. But if you can't, it's okay. And yeah, leave the weapons. Here is 45 seconds of Joe Biden making the argument that if you leave those weapons in the Middle East, those weapons will be used on your grandchildren and mine. And I think that's not wrong. I've seen, and I don't have the tabs because it was kind of tangential, but I've seen the Taliban in American army gear. I'll go get the tweet. Hold on a second. I'm sure I retweeted it. Here it is. It's AF Post, and they say the Taliban, now armed with leftover U.S. military gear, aim to invade Israel from the east. Quote, if other countries give us passage, we will conquer Jerusalem, they say. So here is the Taliban in their spiffy new U.S. fatigues, right? And pretty wild stuff. They just left it all behind in boxes. Yeah, go ahead, use it. It's fine. No problem. Didn't cost us anything. Here's Biden talking about how if you leave those weapons back there, they'll be used against our kids and grandkids. Here we go.
Big difference to tell the American people the truth about what our options are in ending this war. If tomorrow the order goes out from I'm President of the United States, I issue an order, end the war today, begin to withdraw all American troops. It will take a year to get the American troops out. Do you hear me now? That's the truth. It will take a year to get them physically out. Now, if you leave all the equipment behind, you might be able to do it in 7 months. And you leave those billions of dollars of weapons behind, I promise they're going to be used against your grandchild and mine someday. And you leave those billions of dollars.
Creepy. This was from 2007. And his physicality is different. His face looks different. People say he had plastic surgery and, all of that stuff. I don't know, man. It seems real different to me. Here is Joe Biden, and he refuses to, here's current Joe Biden, and he refuses to take questions about, was it an intelligence failure? How did they get past the fencing? We paid a lot of money for this foreign defense that failed. Weird, right? Here we go.
Thank you very much.
Mr. President, was there an intelligence failure in the lead up to this attack?
Mr. President, can you tell us what Phoebe asked you?
specifically for support?
Thank you very much.
He just walked out, by the way, if you weren't watching. Just walked out. Here is, these guys are talking about government conspiracies, and Joe Rogan is saying that, this whole military action, this whole thing seems like, well, this person says, how did the Iron Dome fail in Israel, and how did all those rockets get through? How did so many Hamas soldiers get past the most militarized and protected border in the world to slaughter innocent civilians? Israel is incredibly advanced with some of the best military and surveillance technologies in the world. Is there any chance this is like Operation Northwoods, and the attack was orchestrated or allowed to justify an escalation of war? Could forces above both the U.S. and Israel and Palestine be manipulating them both for an agenda ahead of the elections? There are levels and complexities to what is happening right now, and you all have to start thinking like they do with the strategy and special interests in mind. You can't just immediately accept the narrative being spoon-fed to you by governments, intelligence agencies, and mainstream media like it's the only objective truth that you can accept without question. Have none of you learned a lesson since COVID? Here is Joe Rogan, and the one guy is making the case that the government wouldn't lie to you. They're telling you the truth, for sure. They're not. Here we go.
No, the only conspiracy theory that does make some sense to me is
What?
Kennedy.
The only one ever?
Yeah. No,
What
there are
about
other ones.
Enron?
What about the
Enron wasn't a
scandemic?
cons-
What
Enron
about
was a
Gulf of
conspiracy that-
Tonkin?
Enron was a conspiracy, and they did time
What
in jail.
about the Gulf
That
of
wasn't-
Tonkin?
Bay of
What about
Pigs?
Operation Northwoods?
Yeah, but I'm saying all
That's
of
the
those.
craziest one.
That's a crazy one.
Operation Northwoods was, but hold on.
Here we go. This is the
Hold on.
best.
Operation Northwoods
I don't know why Brian does
was the Joint Chiefs of Staff came up with a bunch of different suggestions for the president.
Brian, they
That
signed
happens.
that. The Joint Chiefs of Staff signed off on Operation Northwoods, which means they were gung-ho to blow up a jetliner and blame it on Cuba. They were going to arm
100%.
Cuban friendlies and
war.
attack Guantanamo Bay.
So
They
hold on.
wanted to give us motivation to go to war with Cuba.
Excuse me, but when the president says to his Joint Chiefs, when he says to his military brass, he says, come up with different scenarios of what we do with this problem. Everything is on the table. You get 1,000
Including killing
suggestions.
American civilians.
You get
That's
1,000
that,
suggestions.
Brian, that's a conspiracy.
And Kennedy said
Brian.
no.
Yeah.
It's not a conspiracy.
Brian,
no,
It
it's
is
not.
a conspiracy.
It
It's
is
not a conspiracy.
100% a
It is
conspiracy to
100%
lie
not.
to the American people
They-
through blowing up a jet. It is a plan to lie to the American. They conspired to create a scenario that did not exist. They were going to blow up a jetliner. They were going to attack Cuban friendlies. They were going to kill Americans.
No,
So the public gets behind it.
So
God
again,
damn
so
it,
again,
Brian.
again, guys.
So, keeping in mind, do you think the government would coordinate maybe some mercenaries to come across a border? You maybe have Israel look the other way, and then all of a sudden that whole West Bank problem's done, right? Because those brazen terrorists, unbelievable, right? Pierre Poilievre's. Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for watching. This is just a short version of a longer show. If you'd like to get the whole show, you can go over to CanadaPoly.com and sign up for a subscription. Just look in the drop-down tab for Shop and Donate and look for subscriptions, and you'll get immediate access to the full show. Love to see you. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.